There are two more giant games coming down the pipeline. How does the aftermath of Notre Dame and Georgetown highlight the need for UConn to get wins in these high-profile games? You're locked on.
You are Locked On UConn, your daily podcast on the UConn Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks for making Locked On UConn your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Before we dive into today's show, just want to take a moment to say thank you to all of you who are listening. This podcast has grown so much, and it's because of fans like you who value great UConn content. We're proud to say we're the only daily podcast covering both the UConn women and men's basketball program, the absolute basketball capital of the world, and we're thrilled to bring you the coverage you deserve. So to show that gratitude, we're giving back. We're donating 10% of our revenue to Husky Ticket Project, helping send kids go to UConn games at Gamble, at the Excel Center. And we're making monthly donations to Bleeding Blue for Good, supporting NIL initiatives that make a difference. If you're enjoying the show, take a moment to subscribe, follow, leave a review wherever you listen. Thanks again for making this Locked On UConn show your first listen every day. Today's episode is sponsored by FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return. New customers can place a $5 bet and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Okay, without further ado, we bring in Hartford Courant beat reporter Emily Adams. She is joining us after being, not being on the show for a while. You've been missed. I have to ask you a question right out of the gates. UConn lost to Notre Dame. Then they overwhelmed and overmatched Georgetown. Which team are we more likely to see against a tough Iowa State squad and, more importantly, an even tougher USC squad? The team that lost to Georgetown or the team that destroyed Georgetown? Or lost to Notre Dame or a team that lost to Georgetown? Or what? Geez, my head is all over the place.
I got you.
What I mean.
I know where you're at. Yeah,
I'm going to sit back and listen.
I think we're more likely to see the Georgetown version, quite frankly, especially against Iowa State. Obviously, that's no longer a ranked game as of about an hour ago.
Saw that.
And that is, I'm an AP voter. I knocked Iowa State out of my rankings this week. That was not surprising to me. It's Iowa State, I think, has a high ceiling, but they've had a really hard time putting the pieces together and really contending with that upper echelon. They have a 40-point loss to South Carolina, which it's South Carolina, but 40 points is pretty ugly.
It's a lot.
So, I don't feel bad about UConn's ability. I think it's going to be similar to like the North Carolina game where, you'll see them kind of go back and forth a little bit. You might see them close in, but I would be surprised if there's ever really a doubt. USC, I have a hard time knowing what to make of them right now, quite honestly. That they did not look great in their Notre Dame loss. Neither did UConn. They have not played literally anyone since that game, pretty much.
Yep.
They're playing JuJu for an enormous amount of minutes by the margin that they're winning by. She rolled her ankle in their game last night, so now it's kind of a question. I don't know if they're expecting her to miss time or anything, but she's been banged up a little bit just with the volume that she's playing right now. So I think that game, having it at home, I think is huge. Having it at a sold out XL, I think is a really big deal. I think that was one of the hardest things for UConn about that Notre Dame game was, you saw it in the fourth quarter. Hidalgo hit that buzzer beater at the end of the third, and it was kind of done after that. Like they just could not fight their way back into momentum. So I think having that on their side to begin with bodes well for them, against an opponent like USC.
I've been meaning to talk to you about this, and I'm going to take my time. UConn's defensive coverage against Hannah Hidalgo. As someone who has played the game, as someone who has covered it, I was increasingly frustrated at mental lapses by multiple players, some of which I've named already on the show, whether it was KK, whether it was Caitlin, Ice Brady. You mentioned that three-pointer at the buzzer in the end of the third quarter. At every moment that there were opportunities for UConn to potentially put Notre Dame on their heels, they had a defensive lapse. I shudder to think it's not physical. They're one of the most talented teams in the country. They're mental mistakes. Was any of that discussed with Geno in questions afterwards? Because I can't imagine he was just like, "Hey, we should probably go under all our screens against Hannah Hidalgo."
Yeah, I think a lot of it. I mean, that's not a new phenomenon for them with her. Obviously, she, hung almost 35 on them last year in a very similar situation. And that was with, a much better defender in Nika out on the floor. So
Sure.
I think a lot of that and I think this is kind of what he said post game, is a lot of the mental lapse you do sort of attribute just to youth and sort of getting overwhelmed by the experience, overwhelmed by, I think the hard thing with Hidalgo is that once she started hitting, she didn't miss, and so it was just, I mean, you could see it even in the body language. Like, you can see Ice Brady after Hidalgo hits that buzzer beater, just kind of like throw her arms down. Like, the frustration started to get palpable as she just kept hitting shots and kept hitting shots. But yeah, I think that was sort of the biggest like concern out of that in a long-term sense of, you're going to face a lot of elite guards this year, and a lot of guards who are quick like Hannah and, can hit threes like Hannah.
Sure.
And frankly, Notre Dame has two of them. They got lucky that Olivia Miles was off the floor for a lot of that game. So it's, I think that's something, again, that will hopefully improve as the season goes on, as they get more experienced, as they get more comfortable just kind of with each other and in the schemes and with switches and things like that. But yeah, it was a pretty embarrassing performance against someone who you came into the game knowing is one of the three best players in the country right now.
Yeah, I just think you can tell the difference between the scheme between what Notre Dame did to Paige and what we tried to do to Hannah. And I think for me is I can accept the youth answer. I think I don't accept the it happening multiple times. Like, that can happen once in a game. Like, I wrote them down in the night of the game, but to rehash it really quickly, like, when she got going, that like 6-0 run is what probably frustrated me the most. Is you had KK helping on, I don't know who. Like, who cares if like Lai Tu King had the game of her life, but we would have probably been more. We would have been fine if she got 30, because all her shots are inside the paint. She wasn't hitting threes, and then, so that was one. And then the very next play, you have Ashlyn Shade retreating to the basket and just let Hannah step into a three. And it's just like, those two shots is what catapulted her to being who she is, which is in your face. I'm going to make everything now. Yep. And then she had all the confidence in the world. Like, she started awful because they were trying to force her left, which is not her strong suit. So the initial game plan worked. And I just couldn't see, I just couldn't understand how after that it was, and then Geno said it, when you fight back, you lose a lot, of energy. And I see why the third quarter happened with Ice not kind of just being like, hey, I'm 6'5", go buy me, or 6'3", versus, hey, I'm going to drop off and just put my hand up. So yeah, I get it's youth, but calm me down. Why are we gonna do a better job against Iowa State's guards, and most notably JuJu, when we play the USC?
Yeah, I mean, I think, UConn had a pretty good defensive game against JuJu last year. And I think the thing, with both Iowa State and with JuJu is that you're looking at the matchup. Like, they both will match up very differently than Hannah did, because like, I didn't like my biggest frustration, not my biggest frustration, but one of my problems with the defense on Hannah was that it was so much KK and Caitlin guarding her. Like, that was a really questionable decision for me, because those are not your two best defenders. They're decent, they're fine, but that is not who you want guarding the best player on the opposing team. You want Paige, or you want Ashlyn, or even Sarah on that person.
Yeah, I was going to say, you could almost put Sarah on her.
And so I think, when you look at someone like JuJu, like JuJu's a little bit of a bigger guard. She's probably going to get the Paige matchup. Paige is a much stronger defender and a more consistent defender than either KK or Caitlin are. I think when you look at Iowa State, like, their biggest threat is Audie Crooks, who's going to match up, I'm almost certain, with Sarah. We'll probably get a little bit of, the Ice Jenna matchups with her as well. But, the stars on those teams aren't going to put you in the position to have your weaker guards defending them like Notre Dame does. But yeah, I mean, I think it's just a game plan that has to change if they see them again. It cannot be those two on here all night, because they don't have that same first step quickness to stay with a player like that. And I think there are players on this UConn roster who do and who just kind of weren't in the right matchups and the right positions to do it.
For sure. When we return, we're going to get an update on Azzi Fudd's status, and potentially what does Emily make of fans questioning if Geno has enough juice left to get this team back on track. And then we're going to talk about freshman Morgan Cheli's performance yesterday against Georgetown. Coming up after the break. What's up, you guys? Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right, we're back on Locked On UConn with your host, Mark Zanetto. We have Emily Adams of the Hartford Courant. Thank you so much for being with us, Emily. All right, look, number 4 in the country. AP poll came out. You're an AP voter. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think that felt about right to me. That is where I had them in my poll. Okay. I've been really high on Notre Dame really since the beginning of the season. I think eye test wise, they look like maybe the best team in the country to me. But the Utah loss, especially, the TCU loss obviously looks a little better than it maybe did at the time. But I think they're sort of like the UConn men, where you sort of have to go, that was a weird Thanksgiving tournament. They had a weird lapse, in a little tropical location, and now they're back and they look normal again. So it would not surprise me if we see them continue climbing those rankings once they get into ACC play and are seeing, ranked opponents more consistently. And yeah, I mean, I think UConn is still easily, one of the 5 best teams in the country at their best. It's just whether they can get to consistency with that.
For sure. Well, and to that point, when they're whole, or somewhat whole, what's the status on Azzi Fudd?
So not too much new, unfortunately. We're still kind of on that day-to-day tag that she, got after this week. Said she would be out this week, and then kind of they were going to take it day by day after that. She didn't warm up against Georgetown. So I would be a little bit surprised if she plays against Iowa State. Normally they like to have players like do a warm up, kind of get into the feel of things before throwing him back out there, especially with someone like her. You have to take everything so slow in the interest of preserving her for when it matters the most. So yeah, I would be a little surprised if she plays against Iowa State. I think it will be a very promising sign if she warms up, because that will then indicate that she's pretty likely for USC. And that's the game where you really, really need her, as an offensive threat, but I think almost even more importantly, as a defensive option, when you're dealing with somebody like JuJu, to, if she's in the Page matchup, to be able to pull Page and have someone at the 2 who is an equally strong defender. I mean, she's looked so good defensively to start this year. And I think that showed, frankly, in the Notre Dame loss just as much as the 3-point shooting did.
Absolutely. All right. I'm going to ask you a question that you're probably going to laugh at, but also I think it just begs the question sometimes, are UConn fans spoiled? Because I feel like I get, especially when I do a live show, you get the prisoner of the moment mentality where someone will go, this team isn't tough enough and this team is this. I felt like when I did my live show yesterday, I did say a few times that I felt like the post players have to get tougher outside of Sarah. Mm-hmm. I do feel like Jana, I do feel like Ice needs to be, like their enforcer. Like, I don't care if Ice scores a point. I want Ice to get me 12 rebounds and have 4 fouls
Yeah.
and in a playful way inflict some pain on some people. You know what I mean? Your name's Ice Brady. You're not, Jane Wilson. It's, take some people out and in a healthy way, right? But my point is, people are questioning, and it's not just it's and there's some notable accounts of people that have a lot of followers on in the Twitterverse, if you will, asking whether Geno Auriemma has the juice to continue to get this team that 12th national championship, or is the game passed him by, essentially? Is the question that I'm asking you.
Yeah, I mean, I think the extent that it's been taken to is a little silly over like a loss to a team that, again, like I think iTest is the best team in the country right now.
Mm-hmm.
It like Notre Dame is really, really good. And so I think it's not a crisis to lose to a really, really good team on the road in front of a sold out crowd with a very inexperienced team in the first week of December. That is not
Sure.
panic button territory to me. I think it's completely fair to say that some of that Notre Dame loss, maybe even the majority of that Notre Dame loss, is on coaching decisions. I think, whether it's game plan, whether it was kind of just like the lack of being able to adjust in game,
Right.
they definitely did not navigate that game as well as they could have and should have. But I also I just don't think that that's like Geno losing his step. I think it's just like they got out coached. Again, Niele Ivey is a
Happens.
phenomenal coach and has a phenomenal team, and UConn got outclassed, and that is a thing that happens in December. So I think, especially when you look at his postseason track record, like UConn has always been a team that puts it together down the stretch. You look at last year. I mean, at this time last year, they were outside the top 15 in the AP poll, and 3 months later.
Let me ask you. No, I'm sorry to cut you off. I follow up to because you're spot on. But do you think it basically it's because we've talked about this before, where he's a prisoner of his own success, where he's been so good and they've been so dominant that some fans can't really get their minds around that women's college basketball is deeper than it ever has been. And there is more than one team that can beat you. And if I know Iowa State's not ranked and they're probably going to be a team where we handle, but you're facing two teams and then USC that can beat you if you play like you did against Notre Dame. They could leave this week with 3 losses, and that's unheard of in UConn history. So you think that's part of it?
Yeah, I think it's partly too. I mean, just like coaches are better now than they were, especially in the women's game. There's more money in the women's game. There's more opportunities for like female coaches, for former players to get. I mean, you look at like Niele Ivey's a former player. Dawn Staley is a former player. Kara Lawson at Duke is a former player. Like those are the people who are kind of on the rise. I mean, even you look at like Tennessee has really been on the rise with Kim Caldwell, who's a first-year head coach out of Marshall. It's just the landscape is so different now, and there's so many different styles out there, and so many different coaching trees and ways that people have come up in women's basketball, that I think it's just it's harder. Like it's harder to beat everybody all the time. There's just more talent out there, and that's talent in players, that's talent in coaches, that's talent in staffs, that's talent even in just like resources and training staffs and athletic training, all of those types of things, I think factor into just sort of how much deeper just the world of women's basketball is now. And I think it's, UConn still wins the games that it's supposed to win. Like UConn does not lose generally, when everybody's been healthy, like they've never lost a Big East game with Paige on the floor. And so it's
insane.
Like, right. And that's the thing. Like they win the games that they're supposed to win. And sometimes you lose to the elite teams, especially when it's December and your team is extremely young and your second best player just sprained her knee. So again, like I don't we're not in panic territory at all for me after this loss. I get why fans are. And especially because it's the rivalry, like Notre Dame is always going
Sure,
to
that's true.
inspire extra feeling from the general public. But yeah, I mean, I'm not super worried about what happened in that game in a long-term way.
Okay. Well, good. I wasn't either. I just wanted to make sure that we were on the same page because I was fighting people off Sunday and yesterday, so or Saturday and yesterday. But we're going to take one more break and we're going to come back and get back on the positive side of things because Morgan Cheli is likely going to be earning herself some more playing time, at least
Mhm.
you would think, coming up
Yeah.
after the break. It's that time of year, guys. The college football playoff is back, and with the newly expanded 12-team format, it's guaranteed to be the bigger and better than ever, bringing you all the hard-hitting and high-flying excitement that you'll love. TNT sports coverage of the college football playoff begins December 21st, starting with the college football playoff kickoff show presented by AT&T at 11 a.m. Eastern time, leading into our first matchup, SMU Mustangs battling the Penn State Nittany Lions at noon. Then you have the Clemson Tigers as they look to upset the Texas Longhorns in a showdown at 4 p.m. Eastern. Don't miss a moment of the action. Watch the college football playoff presented by Allstate live on TNT, True TV, TBS, and Max. All right, you're back on Locked On UConn. Let's get Emily back in the program. All right, Emily. We talked about the aftermath of Notre Dame. Georgetown was a whooping. We didn't really get into that because honestly, talked about it yesterday. It was a ho-hum game, but there was kind of something that I thought was a bright spot, and you could tell she's getting a little more playing time. But this felt a little bit more like trust has been bestowed upon her by Geno. I know that's tough for him with freshmen that are not named Sarah Strong. Morgan Cheli, tell me about your impressions of her yesterday, and what do you think her contribution is going to be in these next two upcoming games?
Yeah, she's someone Gino has been really high on since the preseason. Like he has always spoken incredibly highly of her and the way that she practices and just kind of the ceiling that she has in terms of being able to contribute for this team. But yeah, I think that Georgetown game was the first time we really sort of saw it come to fruition in a game setting. She's just so valuable because it's similar to Sarah, just because of how versatile she is. You know, she's I think she's listed at 6'2", so she's got a lot of
Mm-hmm.
length. She can play kind of a combo guard forward type of role. You know, she can shoot, she can rebound, she can make passes. You know, she had led the team with 3 steals yesterday, matched Paige. So, you know, I think it's the amount of things that she's able to impact makes her such a valuable piece off the bench to just kind of come in and throw a different look at people. And Gino talked about it yesterday. You know, he likes that small lineup with Sarah kind of running the 5. And
Mm-hmm.
especially against a team like Iowa State, I think that's a lineup that's probably going to work really well. And Morgan gives you another outside shooter who's also kind of a post threat. So it forces the opponent to really change up the defensive look when she's on the floor and actually kind of hitting on those shots. And that's what happened against Georgetown. She came in, hit a shot right away, hit her second one, and then it became, okay, we can't let this freshman beat us. And that opens things up for everybody else. So I think if she's getting to a point where she's comfortable and confident and not sort of having the freshman mental errors and nerves that, you know, are just sort of inevitable early on in a career.
Yeah.
I think that's a huge game changer for them, especially, you know, as long as Azzi is out and if Ayanna ends up being out for the year, having a little more size and length that you can rotate in there is huge.
When are we going to know about Ayanna? That's something I gave an update to Locked On Women's Basketball, but you know it's still just day to day. You know, and they're trying to
Yeah.
make a decision of whether she's going to have surgery. Is it still kind of up in the air, or when's the kind of like the line of demarcation there for when they're going to make a decision?
Yeah, I think, you know, by the holiday break, they're probably going to make a call one way or another on whether she needs surgery. Obviously, if she does need surgery, that's going to be season ending. If she doesn't, I think it
Sure.
will continue to just kind of be a rehab it, see where she's at, get her back into contact when they can. But it's, she's now aggravated that injury once, re-injured it, 2 days into contact practice. So it's, having her back is not something they can rely on at this point.
Gotcha. Last question. Do you think that and it's more surrounded around the USC game? I'm not trying to bypass Iowa State, but I think as far as USC goes, as you mentioned, they're kind of an enigma, but they have a lot of talent. Do you think that I love the lineup of Sarah at the 5? Do you think they do that against USC with Ryan Marshall at the center position, or because I don't see that being as big a mismatch because Sarah is so long and she kind of bothers everybody. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, USC is definitely a little bit bigger. I feel like the challenge with USC is that some of their guards are a little bit bigger too. So you sort of run into that situation where you don't want to use all your size against the forwards because you want to be able to have Sarah kind of even as a defensive option on JuJu and things like that. So yeah, I think we'll definitely see it. I think we'll probably see more of, the Sarah Ice, Sarah Jana, possibly. I think that game will be one where they need a lot from Jana in terms of just kind of being able to be that big physical presence in the post, because she sort of is more of that role than Ice is right now. But yeah, it would not surprise me if we see quite a bit of that lineup just about every game going forward, just because it is such a different look. It gives them, a little bit of a spark, a little bit of a different option offensively. So, especially if they end up, like in a hole against USC, trotting that one out, I think is probably going to be a good option just to throw a different look at them.
All right. Well, she's Emily Adams. I'm Mark Zanetto. This has been another episode of Locked On UConn. We're asking you to stay locked on, stay connected. Remember, it's not just about getting it done. It's about doing it in a way that it can't be done any better. That's our goal every day. And we'll be back tomorrow. Emily will be back another time. I'm sure of it. Go Huskies.